Hi, everyone. My name is Jean Hotman. I'm the marketing event coordinator at Datalink. Before we get started on the webinar, Unlock Azure Efficiency and Cost Savings, I'm going to walk through some housekeeping items today. Everyone does have their cameras and their mics muted off. If you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, please type them through the chat, and we'll do our best to address those questions at a convenient time or during our Q&A portion towards the end of the webinar. We're going to have two poll questions, one towards the beginning and then one on the latter half of the webinar. And we do encourage participation as this facilitates more dialogue and tailored conversation about Azure. Last important detail, if you stay through the entire webinar, you are eligible for a free Azure Cost Audit. And that being said, I'm going to pass things along to Justice Silva, who is our data analyst at Datalink.
Hello all. So before I introduce myself or Michael, who will be doing the presentation of our partner, I'm actually going to introduce Datalink Networks. If you haven't been introduced or haven't had any conversations with us, we are a national managed service provider. We provide all things in the realm of IT. Some of them are listed out below. One of the main things we're going to be discussing today is Azure, as I'm sure you know, but we also cover all aspects of Microsoft. We have custom cybersecurity, networking projects that we run, as well as hardware procurement. We like to think of ourselves as a one-stop shop. So anything that you have an IT need for, even if it isn't listed below or you haven't seen it listed, is something that we can provide for you. We're headquartered in Santa Clarita, California, but I'm calling in from our other South HQ in Bentonville, Arkansas. We have locations all throughout the nation, and we're happy to have you today. And then from there, I'm going to pass it off to Michael Stephenson, who will be representing Turbo 360.
Thanks, Justice. Hi, everybody. It's really nice to meet everyone. My name's Mike Stephenson. I'm actually based out of the UK, so I'm in a place called Newcastle, which is in the north of the UK, just before the Scottish border, and really lovely part of the world if anyone ever gets a chance to be over here. So my background is I'm a Microsoft Azure cloud architect. I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time when Azure first was in preview, and I was the tech lead for a couple of early adopters of Azure, and I've worked with it ever since. I'm doing a lot of kind of difficult cloud projects over the years. I've also been a Microsoft MVP for 16 years, specializing in Azure integration use cases. I do a lot of blogging in YouTube and about various Azure topics, and more recently I've kind of been involved a lot more in the FinOps space. So a couple of years ago now, I took over a role as product owner for Turbo 360. The product itself is actually founded by a really good friend of mine who also is a Microsoft Azure MVP. And he identified a bunch of gaps around how customers can support cloud solutions in the real world. And he asked me to take over as product owner for the product called Turbo 360, which is part of what we're going to talk about today. And really as part of this, I spend a lot of my time helping companies who are struggling to manage cost in the cloud, trying to understand, how can we save money and then ideally reinvest that money into other cloud projects. Now, I think starting today's topic, we've got a couple of poll questions that we want to throw into the chat. So I think, Justice, if people just answer in the chat if they've got any thoughts on this question. But the key, actually, sorry, we're putting a poll up. Sorry, I forgot about that. So the key question is how much waste do you think you've got inside your Azure tenant? So those, especially those customers that have been doing a lot on Azure for a lot of years, I personally find people have got things they're still paying for that they didn't realize they stopped using a few years ago. And there's that whole housekeeping kind of thing. And a lot of what my job entails is helping customers find that waste and eliminate it. I think the follow-up question I'd ask people if we were chatting over a beer about this is the next obvious question is, how do you know how much waste you've got? Because people have like a rough ballpark sort of figure in their head, but actually how would you even start to validate that? I think it's a really good question, and really that's the crux of today's talk is, if you don't really have transparency on your costs and your wastage, how do you really know how bad things are or how good things are? And these things change all the time. You know, you're deploying new projects, so you've got to kind of think about how you keep on top of this. Are we good to continue now, Justice, after those?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Awesome. Okay, so Houston, we have a problem. You know, I speak to customers all the time about cost management, and I think, you know, it depends. You know, I speak to all different types of people, so we might speak to board level people, we might speak to engineers, we might speak to finance controllers, CFOs, DevOps people, and they all have slightly different views on this cost management problem. But really what it comes down to is the feeling that the organization is spending money on the cloud. They feel like their bill just keeps getting bigger. They feel like they don't really understand where the money goes and what it's being spent on, if it's being spent effectively. And we need to kind of try and tackle that. You know, a lot of companies, the kind of crux of this problem is because we've spent so long using the cloud to empower users and enable use cases and workloads that solve a business problem. But when we've been doing that, running it, you know, 100 miles an hour, transforming the business, delivering digital transformation, we've kind of done these projects and moved on, and people haven't really thought about how do we make this sustainable for the long term. So we may have changed the business, but actually if we can't maintain the support and the running costs for it, we need to make some changes to fix that. Otherwise the project we delivered may not be viable anymore. So if we think about what, you know, take a step down, why do we have this problem? And really the cost problems for a lot of companies come down to a couple of things. So number one, there's a lack of visibility on where does your money actually go and what are you spending your money on? You know, so you get this big cloud bill every month. How easy is it to break that down and work out actually where's my money being spent? Which teams are spending the money? What kind of resources am I spending it on? And a lot of that problem really comes to a disconnect between roles. So we have people who deliver Azure projects that consume money, but they often don't really have visibility of the cost of what they're delivering. And then the people who maybe see the billing data, they often don't really have any involvement or visibility of the projects that are being delivered. So we've got these kind of two groups of people, and because they're not working together as a team, the gap between those people is where all the money, that all the wastage goes. So we're missing out on cost saving opportunities. We're missing out on the opportunity to make people accountable for the cost they incur on Azure. And then we really where we want to get to, you know, if you're a customer who's delivering really good cost-effective solutions, cost awareness has to be part of the culture of the organization. So when you build something, you have to be thinking, how much is this going to cost me in 6 months' time? And that's very rarely the case. Often it's how do we deliver this as quick as we can and as cheap as we can to the point of go live, and there's little thinking after that. So that cost awareness culture is where we really want to get to. Now, for me, in Turbo 360, I talk a lot about zero to hero as a concept. So, you know, people have a cost management problem, but actually what you don't want to do is create this giant project to tackle our cost management problem. You know, you know, quite often I see a company who'll say, right, we're going to do this 3-month cost saving project and we'll spend tens of thousands to go and analyze our data and come up with a bunch of recommendations. And then the problem they have is often they get to that point, the data they're now working on is out of date, and the you know, the recommendations often don't get implemented. And then the people, you know, if you think back to the first thing I said, it's about the feeling of spending money wisely. So quite often 6 months later, we hear people complain that their bills just still going up. It still feels out of control. We feel like we've got lots of wastage. And then they just go around that cycle. So we have to rethink how we tackle cost management. We have to think of it as like a continuous maintenance exercise. If we do a little bit of work on a regular basis, then we'll keep on top of our costs and we'll make continuous improvements and we'll get better. And we'll do, you know, if we do that approach, we'll actually get the outcome we want for much cheaper than it would if we just do these big bang projects over and over. So I'm going to talk about how, with Turbo 360, how we can encourage companies like Datalink Networks, who we partner with, to help customers really make a difference on their, their cost outcomes. So we're going to go through these steps, and I'm going to drop from this slide into Turbo 360 in a minute, but we're going to really go through how you would lay your environment out. How do I start analysing my costs? How do I plan my budgets? How do I do cost reviews? We need to reduce risk. That's a big concern for a lot of companies, is I'm constantly running with this risk that I'm going to be spending unexpected money. And then we look at how to optimize and how to get some guidance on cost management. So I'm going to jump into Turbo 360 now. And I'm going to show you how we manage our own costs inside our company, because I think how we eat our own dog food is a great way to show the product. Now, this demo environment here is set up with some of our costs. And if you imagine we connect to your Azure environment and we start importing the billing data, and the first thing we need to do is we're going to have a lot of billing data, so we need to try and figure out how do we break this up into manageable chunks, because one of the big problems people get is there's so much data, you don't know where to start, you don't know what to do with it, so we need to start breaking it up. And this is where the tree view becomes quite useful here. So if you notice in our company, because we're an ISV, I've broken my cost up by different products that we sell. And then we've got some internal costs as well. And you might notice actually my Turbo 360 costs have actually, the little red icon tells me I've got an alert here. And this is because we've broken our budget today. So we've actually just done a new release this morning, and we've had to do some scale up yesterday and the day before to support this new release. So we've actually got some new costs. But that's broken our budget, and we'll be reviewing that over the next few days and revising that. But what I'm going to show you is the Document 360 product we have is actually a really cool one for looking at costing, because there's a good balance of like fairly predictable costs and then costs that fluctuate quite a bit. And I think that's a really important scenario for customers, where you've got costs that can be changing all the time based on customer demand. So in Turbo 360, we're going to start in this analysis tab up here. Sorry, bear with me a minute. Good time to get logged out. Right, so we'll go past the demogram one there. Right, so if you imagine on this team in the tree view up here, we've got, so in the tree view, I'm going to like map different areas. The cost, the Document 360 team, they work with 12 subscriptions that they use to manage the product. So what I really want to do is manage the cost at a team level or a product level, because if I make it too granular, I've got too much to do. And if I make it too high level, I don't get into the detail enough. So the team level works really well for this team. And over here, what I can do is I can create some graphs really easily. So if you imagine, first off, we're looking across all 12 subscriptions. Now, this view could be across multiple tenants. It could be across different tags, resource groups, etc., etc. And what I want to do is create a graph by service name, daily, as an area chart. I think we'll do it for last month, so we've got a bit more data, and I'll do it with amortized data. So we'll just query the cost here, and we'll see a nice graph pops up, and that shows me, what resource types in Azure I'm spending money on. Now, there's a few things I can do at this point. So number one, on the tree view, when you create a new node on the tree, you always get a couple of graphs pinned at the start of the ones we might want to use. You'd have access to other graphs that we've created in the saved views, and you can save your own and pin your own graphs as well, so you can really customize it for the views you find useful. And then on the graph, you can do things like click through, so I can right click, choose a new dimension, drill down, find out more about the different resource groups or the resources that make up this, and you can just keep drilling down as you need to. We also support things like a compare view. So I quite like this. If I want to compare last month versus the month before, I can just change this here. We can look at April and May side by side, and we can get a flavour of like what's the pattern of spend, how have things been changing, is there anything that looks like we should dig deeper into it. So it's a really easy way, just whatever you like, this data is fairly up to date, so you can just go in and have a look at how you're doing. On the chart, one of the things we wanted to talk about was things like cost reviews. So here I can go into this tab where I've got a similar view, but as a table, and I'm just comparing last month versus this month. So, one of the challenges a lot of customers have is we don't do cost reviews because it takes too long to do them. And the minute we kind of get the data prepared, it's kind of out of date. And what you really want to do is just be able to go and do a cost review whenever you want. So here I can see, bandwidth and VMs are probably the top couple of items I'd want to look at here. And so I don't know how well this term translates to the US, but in the UK, we'd say look for the needle in the haystack. So I'm looking for the top 2 or 3 things that are the most interesting. So for me, I'd start with bandwidth and VM, and then I may drill down to look a bit further, or I may change the group by and look for the top few individual resources, so that the time I spend doing a review, I don't spend it preparing data, I spend it actually looking at resources and working out if I should do something, if something's changed about the resource and that kind of thing. And that's where I think you can really make a difference in, making a cost review be part of your business as usual operations. I do our team's reviews just when you're having a coffee break. If you've got 10 minutes between a meeting, you can just check how things are going, and it just becomes really easy. Now, next up, we want to look at trying to reduce the risk now. So we're going to the monitoring tab. We've got two types of monitoring in place here. So number one, we've got the group budget. So here I can set a threshold, which is my red line. If the blue box hits the red line, we'll get an alert fire out. So that'll tell me, you've got something going on with your cost here. We can send messages to things like ServiceNow, Teams, email, etc., etc. There's quite a few different channels. And from a personal perspective, I like to use a daily budget for most of my teams because I don't want to wait too long before I know I've got a problem. Some people might use a monthly budget, and we support sub-thresholds. If you've got a monthly budget, you don't want to wait the full month before you know things are wrong. So you might say, tell me when I've spent 50% of my budget would be a good example. We also support anomaly detection. So if you look down the bottom here, you can see there's a couple of red dots where we've had things that don't look right. So that the overall cost may not have changed, but within the team, something looked a bit off that day. And here I can see I had a little bit of a spike in my storage account, so I can start investigating what's going on with that storage account. But we got an early warning that something just looks a bit off here. You may want to keep an eye on it, and you might give it a couple of days and see if it just goes away, or you might start digging deeper if it's an ongoing issue. So hopefully so far you've seen that it's really easy to get the transparency, get visualizations that you can share with technical and business people. We can reduce our risk through monitoring, and then we want to move on to optimization. And there's a few different features in this area, and this is where most customers enjoy spending time, because this is where we can start saving money. So the first one I'm going to start with is right sizing. In right sizing, we have 2 types of recommendations. So we have basic recommendations and advanced. So basic recommendations are really about giving you visibility of the things that the Azure portal is telling you, but you might not have noticed. So we find in practice, there's a lot of customers just don't realize these recommendations are there because they're a bit hidden away and they don't act on them. So we're giving you visibility of these recommendations. But we actually go way beyond that as well. And in the advanced recommendations, we run a bunch of Turbo 360 custom algorithms to try and find more things we can clean up. And here you can see I've got like a whole list of things I can look at. So we've got a SQL database where it looks like it's not being used. So I might be able to clean that up and save some money. I've got things like a VM scale set here that I might be able to downsize. So we've got like the current and target plan here listed that I can maybe save a bit of money as well. So I've got a couple of options that I can look at if I want to try and implement this change. So the first one is we can just click here and jump straight out to the Azure portal if I want to go into the Azure portal and change it. The next option is if I want to do a bit more analysis, I can have a look in here, and it shows me a bit of information about what the machine's doing. I can have a look at a bit more detail on the current plan and the target plan over here. And then I've got a few more choices available if I want to implement this. So one of the options might be you're happy to just make these changes straight away. So we can click apply now. And we'll just go and make the change via the API. And that'll go and resize the VM. Now, one of the kind of things to think about doing it now is you will require a reboot if it's a VM. Other resources might be a bit different, but VMs do require a reboot. So I might say, you know what, I like this change, but we need to do it at the weekend. So I can schedule an action. I can queue up a bunch of resources and I can say, right, let's go and make these on Saturday when it's out of hours. So nobody's around, and we'll just do that in the background and apply the change for you. The next option would be ignore. So I can do things like, this weekend we've got we've just gone live with this system. We want to give it 3 months, so I can ignore it for a period of time. I could say, I've got an SLA on this. I know it's over provision, but I need to keep it as a bigger spec machine, so I could just ignore it forever. Or the other one that I quite like, we've got this trigger notification feature. Now, what's really cool about this is, we've put a lot of thought in how I fall into the workflow you might already have. So a good example would be if you've got your own change control process that you need to feed with these changes, you could maybe drop an email to your help desk system with a little report about what you need to be changed, put that in as a ticket, and then you can just follow it through your change process and make the change either via Turbo 360 or outside if you've got other tools you use to do that. One of the other channels I quite like is, if you notice the icon here, we've got this DevOps channel. So if you've got somebody who does Terraform or Bicep or some kind of infrastructure as code solution, we can just drop a work item into Azure DevOps that you can allocate to a developer in the next sprint, and they can go make the change, deploy it via a pipeline, and then we'll see the change reflect when we next do our recommendations after you've made the change. So really what we're trying to do here is kind of encourage you to go from an insight or a recommendation to an action to help get it done. And that's really the key, is to get these done so that you get the benefit of saving money. Now, I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to show a couple of other key areas I think people will find really interesting. So one of them I quite like is this other recommendations area. So we get loads of customers who've just got lots of technical debt lying around all over the place, and some of it will be directly costing you money. Some of it may not have a direct cost straight away, but it's going to be costing you money eventually, because you'll have to figure out, 6 months' time, we've got this project and we don't know what these resources are used for, and we don't know if they still actually are used or not. So here we run about 20 odd queries in the background. You can see all the queries here, looking for things that look out of place. So a really good example and a common one is this manage disks without a VM. So I can click on that, and I think I've got about 11 of these that we can go and clean up. And what happens here is customers will delete VMs they don't use anymore, but they forget to delete the disks, and then these just get left lying around, and nobody really knows that they're not used. So here you can just really easily see this, and then you can go and act on it. So you can do things like download a spreadsheet and go and delete them manually, and trigger notifications to get them deleted. A good example with this one is I had a customer, actually, they saved about 5,000 a month just by deleting disks they weren't using anymore, that they just didn't know they were there. But those disks have been hanging around for at least a year. And you think about the amount of money they've spent on those disks for no business value during that time, because nobody was cleaning up after them. Okay, and then one of the other features I think I'd really like to show is this schedule feature. So what we can do with the schedule, if you think of, you've got all these different discounts and rate optimizations and right sizing and that kind of thing. That all offer great discounts, but sometimes you have resources that you just don't use out of hours. So a really great example would be, maybe something like an HR application where everybody goes home at 5 o'clock, so nobody uses it till 9 the next morning, or maybe something like a non-production environment. So what we'd want to do is see if we can kind of scale the environment down or turn it off, and just make this automation really easy to set up, and then we want to turn it back on and scale it up in the morning. So every node on the tree can have multiple schedules. And what I would do is in here, I'd say, right, let's go and set my schedule up. So I'll give it a name of test. I'll then choose the time window. So red means turn it off and scale it down. Green means turn it on and scale it up. And I can do grey, which means do nothing. So here, for example, we'd be checking it's turned off overnight. 9 in the morning, we'd turn it on. If you manually turn it off at 10, we would leave it alone till 1, and then we turn it back on. So you've got a lot of control about how you can configure this, and you can also do things like monthly schedules and recurrence for every other week and that kind of thing. And we then would choose the resources we want to add to it. So I'm just going to do a quick query here for some app services that I can add. So we'll just let that run in the background there for a second. And the idea is I'll just pick a number of resources that make sense for this schedule. So here I can see some of my app services are reserved at the minute, so they may not be the best candidates, but this one here is possibly a really good candidate. And I can see this is a P1v2 at the minute. I could maybe set that so when it goes red, it becomes a P0v3. So this automation job's going to run in the background, and then it'll say, oh, we've hit the time to scale down. We'll shrink this app service to a smaller plan, leave it overnight so I'm paying a lower rate, and then I'll scale it back up in the morning to the bigger plan ready for when people are going to use it. Now, the most common scenarios that we see here would be app service is really popular. SQL database is really, really popular. So if you think of SQL PaaS databases, we can shrink the vCores and the D2Us out of hours and then inflate them back up in the morning and just make that automation nice and slick. With VMs, we can do kind of turn it off and then turn it back on, or we can shrink it to a smaller size and then inflate it back up to a bigger one in the morning. And those are the most common ones, but we also have some other quite cool, more obscure use cases. So I personally like the data factory one quite a bit. So if you imagine, if you're building a data pipeline in Data Factory, often you'll have a VM or an integration runtime behind the scenes. And what happens if you've got like a tumbling window, you'll find trigger will fire, it'll go and spin up the runtime. It'll then process any data that's available, and then it'll stop and it'll go to sleep for 5 minutes if it's like a 5-minute tumbling window, and then it'll basically start again. And what we had was customers who overnight, particularly the non-prod environments, there's no data to process, but these triggers are constantly running, and they're spinning up the VM all the time behind the scenes to do this runtime. So they kind of get charged per second for this machine running. And actually, it's not doing anything. There's no business value attained from that. So if we can just pause the trigger, we can then turn it back on in the morning, and actually can save quite a lot of money by turning that off overnight. Now, a good example, if we combine things like right sizing and scheduling, a really good story from one of the customers I worked with was they had a vendor who came in to work with them, and they were doing this kind of shift to the cloud from on-prem, and they were moving SQL databases from on VMs on-premise to SQL PaaS, and they're setting up all these non-prod and prod environments with this application, and they used a templated approach for the deployment. So everybody deployed the apps, everybody's happy, the users love it, it was working really well. Project ended, the vendor disappears, all the customers' project team go away, and then suddenly when we were working with them with Turbo 360, this SQL database flags it as one of the biggest right sizings savings, and you look at it, and we're spending $7,000 a month for one database in non-prod, and it was like the resource group, you looked at it and like, actually this is UAT, why are you spending so much on a UAT database when you don't really use it much? And so we had a look at that database, and really what had happened was they'd used the same template they used for production. So this is quite a scaled up database, and it was set to business critical. So we did a couple of changes here. So number one, we changed it from business critical to general purpose, which halved the cost immediately of that database. But then when we looked at the write size and the metrics were showing you that actually during the day it's used a little bit, but at night it wasn't really used at all. So what we're able to do with a scheduler, the database originally was set as 16 cores, but we dropped it to 8 cores during the day and made it 2 cores at night. And really that database, that changed the application. No user noticed any difference at all, but we actually brought the 7,000 a month down to 700 a month in that case. And that was one database in this team who had multiple other databases and servers that had gone through the same experience. So, just when you think about that whole first problem of empowering users to deliver transformation at speed, and then everybody disappears and nobody looked back and said, actually, are we paying a good value for money for this system? And you realize actually there was a whole load of waste in there. And that's what we think a lot of customers will find when you lift the lid and you look under the hood and you find actually there's some really good savings here. And I can use that savings for reinvestment, whether you get consultancy to help you build new projects, you buy new resources for the AI project you wish you had money to do, and that kind of thing. And that's really what you could achieve. Okay, so I think we've gone through most of it. Actually, one feature, I'll just mention that we might have missed there. And we do have quite a cool little budget planner feature here as well. So you can if you think of your actual versus expected cost. So here I've got this red line is my planned cost, and the blue line's my actual cost each day. And the thing about the red line that's interesting, so we have actually, just as a side note, we have added forecasting to this in our release today. So when the overnight jobs run tonight, there'll be a new little bit here that shows me a forecast based on past performance. But one of the things in the red line is any forecasting you do doesn't know about the projects that you've got 6 months from now. So you're not really seeing what your Azure spend is going to look like in the future. So you can actually configure this up here, and you can kind of give us information about your future projects and what you think they might do to your cost. I'm thinking of like a team manager or a project manager. You're used to managing forecasting for materials and people. Well, you can do the same with cloud costs now, so you can track, is your blue line in line with your red line? If you start breaking the line, or it looks like based on your current run rate you're going to break the line, we can ping you an alert to give you a heads up you might have a problem coming up, which I think is good. Okay, so back over to here then. So we've done the demo. So I think just as I'm handing back over to you at this point, if I remember right.
Yeah, that's right. Jaden, if we want to run that next poll, this question is going to be, how often are you internally auditing your own Azure tenant? And the real reason that we're asking this is because the tool that Michael's showing us is a fantastic and wonderful tool, but how often you're utilizing the tools that you have at your disposal right now will be indicative as to how useful this tool can be for yourself. One of the key features that Michael kept describing were those notifications, because if you are currently on a less consistent schedule of auditing your tenant, this creates the infrastructure and the single pane of glass necessary to have you consistently knowing what you're spending your money on. So I think we're just going to give a few moments to let some responses trickle in. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of responses, most people saying on occasion. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that having consistency with those audits is vital to an organization limiting their excessive spend.
What I find in practice, Justice, is on occasion often means when the boss shouts at us because the bill's too big, because it's too painful to do it more regularly, is what we tend to find.
From there, I think we're going to start to take a step back and look at those habits that we're discussing. Like Michael was saying, a lot of times that on occasion really just means whenever somebody else asks about it. So that leads us to the question of who is looking after your garden. Because if we use gardening as an analogy for pruning those unnecessary and over-allocated resources, that is a necessary thing where we look at it consistently. So looking at your teams, who is it that is taking the steps to look at what is being used, what is not being used, what is being underutilized, and what is still being paid for? So continuing that gardening analogy, when you have a garden, you have to go in there and prune and de-weed and optimize. And that's what it is that we as Datalink Networks are trying to bring to the table, is that if you do not have the current infrastructure within your organization to be gardening your Azure tenant, we come in as that person to be your gardener, utilizing Turbo 360 as a tool to prune those unnecessary resources. With that, one of the things that was mentioned at the very beginning of our presentation was actually our Azure infrastructure audit. And as a participant of this webinar, one of the things that we're extending to you is an opportunity to have a free assessment where we ingest your tenant into Turbo 360, and then we will go over the results with you to discuss where you currently stand, where you want to be, what you are using, what you aren't using, and demonstrate how this tool could be effective for your organization specifically. So with this, we're going to be having some outreach after this webinar, giving some follow-up information, providing the next steps if you would like to proceed with that Azure infrastructure audit. One of the things that would happen was I would meet with you personally to ingest your tenant, make sure that things are going as necessary, and then go over those results with you and continue that conversation. Michael would be a resource if necessary if we wanted to proceed further and actually ingest you into a long term. But outside of just utilizing the tool and reselling the tool, Datalink Networks wants to provide prolonged and consistent efforts with managing your Azure audit. So we do also offer a management program where our internal help desk and MSP team can meet with you on a consistent basis at whatever frequency is best aligning with your organization to go over the results and discuss next steps and create a plan of action for the maintaining of your Azure tenant. Michael, we've already brought a few clients to the Turbo 360 team that we work with consistently. Some of them are larger organizations where they've had reductions in cost in the thousands almost immediately. But these are prolonged efforts, and that is one of the big things that we're talking about and describing here, is that Azure is a ever-growing bill. As you add more resources and deallocate resources, we want to ensure, like Michael said, that those projects that we have towards the beginning and middle of the year are actually wrapped up nice and neat, and ensuring that what you are allocating is actually being utilized after that initial start of that process. So this isn't just a one-time check, which would be with the audit, where it's a moment in time to see where you're at. This is a prolonged effort to have better financial and resource allocating efforts throughout your fiscal year. With that, I'm going to ask Michael, do you have any closing remarks that you would want to bring to the table as to how we can utilize Turbo 360? I'm also going to take an opportunity to check the chat, see if we have any questions for myself or Michael.
That's great. I think I'd just reinforce what you were saying about the, from us, it's the partnership, isn't it, that really makes a difference. Because I think a lot of customers too busy with your day job. You've got projects to deliver, and looking after costs isn't the primary aim of most people in the end organization's team. So sometimes having that external person who's not too in the weeds on the project, who can just have an external look, make it really simple to give you some advice on things you can tune, savings you can make. From a management perspective, having like a trusted advisor who can look after making sure your money's being spent wisely, it's a huge value to a company where, especially if you think back to that very first point where the management team feel like the money's, it's just getting, the bill's just getting bigger. It's not spent wisely. We've got lots of waste. Having some money you can trust with a good set of tools to really make sure you're keeping on top of that. But it's not a lot of work to do it. I think it's the secret to getting success on the cloud, I think. And then hopefully, well, the ideal is we find lots of spare cash hidden in your Azure bill that you can reuse for other projects and do something with AI maybe, or invest in some new applications that really add value to the business, because at the minute you've probably got money that's being left on the table.
Yeah, and I'm not currently seeing any questions coming into the chat. We are approaching our end of time, so I'm going to leave some of our contact information, but I will reiterate that we will be following up with everyone that has attended, providing some further information, and also some calls to action to see if you are interested in that fully complimentary Azure infrastructure audit. Outside of that, I want to thank everybody for their time, and we appreciate your participation in our polls.
It's nice to meet everybody. Take care. Thank you for letting me join you, Justice, as well.
Of course, I appreciate you for being here.